Ladies and gentlemen, what if I told you that certain people do not simply remember you? They carry you, not in their arms, not in their conversations, but in the concealed chambers of the mind, far beneath the surface, where reasoning grows still and the unconscious starts to speak. What if the reason you keep experiencing a strange pull, a quiet tension, or an invisible bond is because in ways they do not entirely comprehend, you have become impossible to forget? Not loud, not obvious, not always confessed, but present, alive, returning again and again. Because there are people who can walk away from your door, leave your message unanswered, sit inside a room full of noise and still sense your presence in the quiet of their own thoughts. They may smile in public. They may seem perfectly fine. They may pretend to be occupied, unfocused, or over it. But inside, something keeps drifting back to you. Your name, your face, your voice, your energy, your memory. And in the language of Carl Jung, that is never simply a coincidence. The psyche does not hold on to what carries no weight. The unconscious does not revisit what has no emotional charge. When someone cannot shake you from their mind, there is a reason far deeper than surface-level attraction. There is a psychological imprint. There is a symbolic force. There is something in you that reached something in them that they did not anticipate, could not contain, and now cannot fully let go. And tonight I want to speak to the part of you that has quietly and honestly wondered, do they still think about me? Did I truly matter that much? Why does the connection feel incomplete? Why do I still appear in their world, even after all the silence? Ladies and gentlemen, in the world of Jungian psychology, the answer may be far more powerful than you realize. Because when you enter someone's unconscious, you do not exit easily. You may vanish from their daily routine, but not from the deeper framework of their inner world. You may stop being visible, but you remain felt. You may stop being spoken of, but you continue to echo. And that is where the first sign begins. The first sign is this: they think about you at unexpected moments with no clear trigger, no apparent reason, and no conscious invitation. They are washing dishes, driving down an empty road, standing in a line, scrolling through their phone, pretending to concentrate on work, and suddenly your image surfaces. A thought, a memory, a feeling, a flash. Not because something outside prompted it, but because the mind itself brought you forward. This is significant. Jung understood that the unconscious has its own rhythm. It brings to the surface what the conscious mind attempts to push away. So when someone repeatedly thinks of you for no obvious reason, it means your image has been stored not merely as a memory, but as an emotionally charged symbol. You are not simply another person from their past. You have become psychologically active. People frequently misunderstand memory. They believe memory belongs only to the past. But memory is also about energy. A person is not remembered simply because they were present. They are remembered because they mattered, because they stirred something, because they awakened something that had long been resting inside the other person. That is why one person can be forgotten within a week, while another lingers for years. The difference is not always time. The difference is depth. Some encounters are shallow, and some are archetypal. Some people move through our lives like a breeze across an open field. Others arrive like lightning and leave a lasting pattern behind. And if someone keeps thinking of you without warning, it means your presence has become a recurring internal experience. They may not message you. They may not acknowledge it. They may not even fully understand it themselves. But the mind knows. The mind revisits what carries emotional weight. The unconscious returns to what was left unresolved. And that unresolved quality is often the strongest indication that you never truly departed from their thoughts. The second sign is this: you begin to appear in their dreams, or they appear in yours with striking intensity, as though the psyche is trying to complete a conversation that waking life refused to finish. Jung placed great importance on dreams because he believed dreams are not meaningless noise. Dreams are communications from the unconscious. Dreams are the language of what we feel but do not voice, know but do not admit, yearn for but do not fully confess. So when someone enters your dream repeatedly, or when you sense strongly that you are entering theirs, it can mean the connection has shifted from the conscious level into the symbolic realm. Dreams do not communicate in ordinary language. They speak in images, moods, symbols, and emotional patterns. So perhaps you do not dream of the person exactly as they are. Perhaps you dream of a doorway, a train station, a dim hallway, a distant voice, a hand reaching forward, a room you cannot quite enter, a face you almost recognize. These images are not ornamental. They are psychological signals. They point to a bond that the conscious mind cannot neatly categorize. Maybe the relationship was never brought to a close. Maybe the feelings were never fully spoken. Maybe the person represents something in your own inner world that is still waiting to be understood. And that is where Jung becomes so powerful, because he teaches us that sometimes the person we believe we miss is also the symbol of a deeper need. We think we miss their smile, but perhaps we miss the safety we felt in their presence. We think we miss their voice, but perhaps we miss the version of ourselves that came alive around them. We think we miss their attention, but perhaps we miss the feeling of being truly seen. Dreams bring these buried truths to the surface, and when someone appears there again and again, it is often because their image has been granted a place in the unconscious that the conscious mind cannot simply erase. There is something haunting about being remembered in dreams. It means you are not merely being thought of in daylight. You are being processed at night in the private theater of the soul. And that is not trivial. That is not casual. That is the mind attempting to resolve what the heart has not yet settled. The third sign is projection. And this one is deeply Jungian. Projection occurs when a person places their own hidden feelings, fears, desires, and possibilities onto someone else. They do not always perceive you as you truly are. They see you through the lens of their own inner world. They may admire you too intensely, distrust you too quickly, idealize you without cause, or feel unexpectedly uneasy in your presence. Why? Because you are holding something for them that they have not yet made peace with within themselves. This is one of the most profound signs that you never depart from someone's mind. They are not reacting to the surface of you alone. They are reacting to the psychological material you have activated within them. Maybe your confidence reminds them of the strength they once lost. Maybe your calm unsettles the chaos they keep concealed. Maybe your vulnerability awakens a tenderness they do not know how to express. Maybe your independence triggers their fear of being unwanted. Maybe your kindness exposes how starved they are for genuine emotional connection. Whatever it is, you are not simply a person to them. You are a mirror, and mirrors are powerful because they reveal what we do not always wish to see. A person who projects onto you cannot easily forget you because they are not merely attached to your image. They are attached to the internal story your image brought to life. Even after distance, even after silence, even after the practical side of life moves forward, the projection may persist. They may find themselves measuring others against you. They may hear your name and feel a strange unease. They may encounter someone with your mannerisms and suddenly go still. They may become defensive when your memory arises, or unexpectedly tender or oddly solemn. This is not random. This is the unconscious at work. And the reason this carries such weight is that projection binds people in invisible ways. They may believe they have moved on, but their mind has not released the symbol you became. They are not free from you because they never fully understood what you represented. To move beyond a person, the psyche must first make sense of why that person mattered. When it cannot, the person becomes a recurring emotional figure, a kind of inner ghost, not frightening, not harmful, just unfinished. The fourth sign is emotional resonance. This is when your energy continues to affect them, even without any contact. They feel something when they hear your name. They feel something when they pass a place connected to you. They feel something when their mood sinks because in those moments, the memory of you grows louder. They may dismiss it publicly, but privately they know that your presence in their inner world still shifts the atmosphere. People often assume that connection ends when conversation ends, but emotional connection is not restricted by physical distance. In fact, some of the strongest emotional impressions are formed when a relationship concludes before it has been fully understood. The heart becomes more engaged when the story remains incomplete. The mind returns to what it could not resolve. The soul keeps raising questions that the ego refuses to ask. That is why someone can be surrounded by people and still feel you most deeply in moments of quiet. That is why they may seem distracted when your name comes up. That is why they may suddenly grow curious about your life, even when they never say so outright. Emotion leaves traces, real connection leaves residue, and the stronger the emotional charge, the longer that residue endures. Jung would tell us that the psyche is not a machine that erases with perfect precision. It is a living system that organizes around meaning. So when you mattered, you matter. When you created an emotional current, the current does not disappear simply because someone wishes it would. It continues beneath the surface, shaping reactions, dreams, impulses, and responses. They may never tell you this, but their behavior often does. The hesitation, the glance, the sudden attentiveness, the avoidance, the curiosity, the repeated checking, the delayed response, the emotional overreaction. These are all signs that something in them is still very much alive where you are concerned. And sometimes the most compelling evidence is not what they say, but what they cannot stop doing. They keep returning, if only mentally, if only through memory, if only through small signs that seem too accidental to name. The truth is, emotional resonance does not require a witness in order to exist. The fifth sign is synchronicity. Jung used this concept to describe meaningful coincidences that are not causally linked, but still carry psychological significance. In simpler terms, it means life begins to arrange itself in ways that feel too deliberate to dismiss. You hear a song tied to them at the precise moment you are thinking of them. Someone brings up their name out of nowhere. Their favorite place appears along your path. You notice repeated symbols, repeated numbers, repeated reminders that pull you back to the same emotional center. Now, let me be thoughtful and honest here. Not every coincidence is mystical. Not every pattern carries destiny. Human beings are instinctive pattern seekers. But Jung's insight was that certain coincidences carry a charge that holds psychological weight. They are experienced as meaningful because they mirror an inner state. So if your mind keeps returning to someone, and the outer world seems to echo that return, it may be a signal that the psyche is trying to draw attention to what remains unresolved. The same can be true on the other side. They may keep encountering reminders of you in ways that feel unusually specific. Your song, your word, your style, your phrase, your image, your memory, a place, a date, a recurring thought, a repeated dream. And gradually the boundary between external reality and internal meaning begins to blur. That is the territory Jung loved to explore. Not superstition, but significance. Not fantasy, but the profound relationship between the outer world and the inner one. When synchronicity gathers around a person, it often signals that the unconscious has assigned them symbolic importance. That is no small thing. It means the person is not just remembered. They are woven into the very fabric of inner meaning. They are one of the names the psyche reaches for when it wants to speak about longing, regret, hope, unfinished feeling, or transformation. And that is why certain people cannot leave your mind. Not because they are physically near, but because they have become part of the architecture of your inner life. The world keeps reminding you because the mind keeps listening. The sixth sign is the most powerful. They cannot fully detach. Not because they are weak, and not because they are obsessed in a simple or immature way, but because something in your connection reached beneath the surface and touched a deeper layer of the psyche. This is where the ego, which craves closure, meets the unconscious, which does not always comply. Detachment sounds straightforward in theory. Move on, let go, forget, replace, distract, rebuild. But the human psyche does not always follow those commands. If a person touched your shadow, your longing, your hope, your fear, your image of love, your sense of self, your feeling of being truly understood, then they have entered territory that is not easily surrendered. They are no longer simply a person. They are a psychological event. And this is where many people misread the signs. They assume that if someone is silent, they are absent. But silence does not always equal absence. Sometimes silence is the very space where memory grows loudest. Sometimes the person who speaks nothing is thinking the most. Sometimes the one who withdraws physically has not separated mentally. Sometimes detachment is only visible on the surface, while the unconscious remains deeply engaged. Carl Jung would remind us that the unconscious often resists the ego's tidy conclusions. The ego says it is over. The unconscious says not yet. The ego says I am fine. The unconscious asks then why do you keep returning? The ego says I have moved on. The unconscious asks then why does the memory still hold power? The ego desires a clean ending. The psyche seeks truth, and truth is often messy, repetitive, and deeply emotional. So when someone cannot detach from you, there is almost always a reason. Maybe you embodied a possibility they never fully reached for. Maybe they recognized in you a quality of love or honesty they were not yet prepared to receive. Maybe they lost access to a version of themselves that only existed in your presence. Maybe you became the symbol of a turning point in their emotional journey. Maybe meeting you marked the moment they first began to see themselves differently. That is not small. That is not forgettable. That is life-altering. And now let us go deeper, because this is where the core of Jung's psychology meets the core of human longing. People are not only drawn to one another by beauty, charm, or convenience. They are drawn by resonance, by unresolved inner material, by concealed needs, by symbolic recognition. We often say, I was attracted to them. But beneath that attraction there may be a more profound declaration. They awakened something in me that I had not yet encountered. That is why two people can meet and feel immediately significant, even when they cannot explain why. That is why certain connections feel ancient, strange, fated, or larger than the moment itself. The psyche recognizes what the conscious mind has not yet found the words for. This is what makes being unforgettable such a mysterious thing. You do not need to be the loudest voice in the room. You do not need to beg for attention. You do not need to force your way into their thoughts. Sometimes your quiet authenticity is precisely what makes you impossible to forget. Sometimes your way of moving through the world, your emotional depth, your rare gentleness, your self-respect, your restraint, your mystery, your warmth, or even your pain, leaves a mark stronger than any performance ever could. People remember what felt genuine. The unconscious responds to authenticity because authenticity carries an energy that cannot be sustained through pretense. And if you have ever wondered why someone keeps circling back to your memory, the answer may be that they never encountered you as just another passing face. They encountered a feeling, a revelation, a disturbance, a comfort, a challenge. You may have reflected back to them a truth they were not ready to face. You may have awakened a longing they had buried long ago. You may have become a reminder of who they still have the potential to be. And the psyche never forgets the person who reshaped its internal landscape. Sometimes, ladies and gentlemen, the one who leaves the deepest impression is not the one who stayed the longest. It is the one who arrived at the precise moment the soul was ready to be transformed. There is also another Jungian layer to this, and it is the shadow. The shadow is the part of ourselves we conceal, deny, suppress, or fail to acknowledge. When someone triggers our shadow, they remain in our mind because they are not only a person to us, they are a doorway into what we have not yet fully understood about ourselves. They may awaken jealousy, admiration, insecurity, desire, fear, tenderness, or grief. And because the shadow calls for integration, the mind keeps returning to the person who activated it. Consider that for a moment. Sometimes the reason a person cannot leave your mind is not that you are trying to hold on to them, but that your psyche is trying to process what they represented. Maybe they made you feel truly seen in a way you were not accustomed to. Maybe they made you feel exposed. Maybe they caused you to question your own patterns. Maybe they touched a wound that was calling for healing. Maybe they revealed a need that had quietly been ignored for a long time. In Jungian language, this is transformation. In human language, it is the kind of connection that alters you permanently. And that is why unresolved connections can feel so consuming, because the mind keeps circling back in search of meaning. It wants to make sense of the feeling. It wants to place it somewhere. It wants to ask, why did this matter so deeply? The unconscious answers because it did. Simple, heavy, and true. Now, let me speak directly to those who are listening with a quiet ache in their chest, because perhaps you have been sitting with this question for a very long time. You have been wondering whether you mattered, whether you were easily replaced, whether your presence faded from their heart the way it faded from the calendar. But the signs do not always come as spoken words. Sometimes the signs are in return. Return of thought, return of dream, return of curiosity, return of feeling, return of memory, return of the same emotional theme, return of the same inner disturbance, return of the same unresolved pull. That is why people who leave a genuine mark are never truly absent. They become part of the internal dialogue. They become part of the psychic background. They surface when defenses are lowered, when distractions have faded, when the heart grows weary of pretending. And yes, sometimes a person can move forward with life and still never stop carrying the imprint of someone who once reached them in a profound way. That is not weakness. That is the nature of being human. Jung would likely tell us that what we call love is often far more than affection. It is frequently projection, recognition, longing, and the yearning for wholeness, all speaking simultaneously. That is why when someone cannot get you out of their mind, it may not simply be because you were attractive or thoughtful. It may be because you symbolized an aspect of life that felt vivid, possible, or deeply meaningful. You were not merely seen. You were felt as essential, and the psyche protects what it marks as essential. Now there is something very important to grasp. Being in someone's mind does not automatically mean they are prepared, mature, or willing to act on it. A person can think of you and still choose silence. They can miss you and still resist reaching out. They can feel the pull and still do nothing. They can replay the past and still lack the courage to face it. The mind and the behavior are not always in agreement. The unconscious may be very much alive, while the conscious person remains very afraid. That is why the signs matter. They illuminate the hidden truth behind the visible surface. They expose the interior life behind the public face. And Jung, more than almost anyone, understood masks. He called it the persona, the social face we wear in order to function in the world. But beneath the persona there is always more. Beneath the composed response is the restless thought. Beneath the controlled expression is the emotional tremor. Beneath the "I'm fine" may lie an entire inner world that keeps your memory breathing. So if someone keeps appearing in your thoughts, or if you keep sensing that you remain alive in their thoughts, do not be too quick to dismiss it as imagination. Ask deeper questions. What did this connection awaken? What was left unfinished? What inner part of each person is still waiting to be acknowledged? What emotion refuses to be quieted? What symbol are you carrying for one another? That is how Jung would invite us to think, not only about people, but about what people represent within the soul. And perhaps that is the strangest truth of all. Sometimes we do not miss the person alone. We miss the part of ourselves that came alive in their company. We miss the hope. We miss the ease. We miss the version of us that believed something beautiful was possible. In that sense, the reason someone never departs from our mind may be because they are bound to a chapter of our own unfolding. But here is the beautiful part, and I want you to receive this clearly. Being unforgettable is not always a weight. Sometimes it is a profound gift. Sometimes you have entered someone's life in such a genuine, powerful, and emotionally honest way that they simply cannot erase you. They may not know how to say it. They may not know how to return to it. They may not know how to act on it. But the imprint is there. The memory is there. The feeling is there. And the unconscious, unlike the ego, does not deceive. So when you notice the signs, When you observe the repeated thoughts, the dreams, the projections, the emotional reactions, the coincidences, the inability to detach, understand that you are witnessing something deeply human and deeply psychological. You are witnessing the way one soul can leave an impression on another soul's inner world. You are witnessing the way the unconscious preserves what the conscious mind cannot fully account for. You are witnessing the mystery Jung devoted a lifetime to uncovering, that the visible world is only half the story. Ladies and gentlemen, you never leave their mind because you did not simply enter their life. You entered their psyche. You entered the hidden space where feelings are stored before they become words. You entered the place where memory transforms into meaning. You entered the place where longing outlives silence. And once that happens, the person you became in their inner world can live there for a very, very long time. So ask yourself tonight, not with fear, but with genuine wonder, what did I awaken in them? What did they awaken in me? What remains unfinished? What truth is still resting beneath the surface? Because sometimes the deepest connections are not the ones that announce themselves loudly. They are the ones the mind returns to in silence. And if your name still lingers in someone's thoughts, if your presence still visits their dreams, if your energy still stirs something buried within them, then perhaps the reason is both simple and profound at once. You mattered more than they can say, more than they can explain, and perhaps more than they were ever truly ready to admit. That is the mystery of the psyche. That is the power of memory. That is the language of Jung. And that is why sometimes, no matter how much time passes, no matter how much distance accumulates, no matter how many words remain unspoken, you never truly leave there.